Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the absolute roller coaster life of the man behind the most ubiquitous entertainment brand in human history, Walter Elias Disney. Now, most of us know the castle, the theme parks, and the movies, right? But today, we're going to look past that polished corporate logo. We're going to examine the fascinating, highly complex human being whose relentless imagination literally rewired global culture. To truly wrap our heads around this global empire, we first have to understand the deeply driven and, honestly, pretty insecure visionary who breathes life into a simple mouse sketch. As one of his own employees famously put it, Oob designed Mickey's physical appearance, but Walt gave him his soul. You see, Walt wasn't just a businessman. He was this unparalleled storyteller who poured his own intense personality, his highest triumphs, and his deepest anxieties into every single frame of animation his studio produced. All right, part one, from farm boy to animator. Let's rewind to his chaotic early years, because this is what really laid the foundation for his totally relentless work ethic. We're talking about a kid who was constantly hustling. He went from being a farm boy in Missouri drawing horses for pennies to moving to Kansas City, where he and his brother Roy woke up at 4:30 every single morning to deliver newspapers before school. He was so determined to see the world that he actually forged his birth certificate so he could drive Red Cross ambulances in France right after World War I. But look at that stretch from 1921 to 1923. He starts his own animation business creating modernized fairy tales, but it completely tanks. He goes totally bankrupt before he even turns 22 and arrives in Hollywood in July 1923 with practically nothing in his pockets, just hoping to become a live-action director. Now, you might be wondering about his personality, and there's a stark contrast between the man and the myth. The public came to know this warm, folksy, outgoing Uncle Walt, but privately, he was a shy, self-deprecating guy who was often paralyzed by insecurity. He openly admitted he was playing a character. He once told a friend, "I'm not Walt Disney. Walt Disney does not smoke, I smoke. Walt Disney does not drink, I drink." He was a demanding boss who rarely gave direct compliments, and he famously used that larger-than-life public identity to hide his shyness. Moving on to part two, the birth of Mickey Mouse. This next phase of his life is wild because it shows how a crushing defeat birthed a global icon. In 1928, Walt gets a brutal lesson in business. He had created this hit character, Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. But when he tried to negotiate a better budget, his distributor, Charles Mintz, revealed he had secretly poached almost Walt's entire animation staff, and Mintz actually owned the legal rights to Oswald. He essentially told Walt, "Take a pay cut or get out." Walt walked away, losing his very first major creation. On the train ride home, he and his one remaining loyal animator, Oob Iwerks, scrambled to come up with a replacement. They landed on a mouse. But keeping this new character afloat, battling shady distributors, and constantly overworking, the immense stress of all that pushed Walt to a severe nervous breakdown in 1931. So how on earth do you bounce back from that? Well, you relentlessly chase the next big thing. Walt realized early on what every successful tech founder knows today. To survive, you absolutely have to push the boundaries of technology. With Steamboat Willie in 1928, he jumped on new audio tech to create the first post-produced synchronized sound cartoon, and he even voiced Mickey himself. Just a few years later, he risked everything again by using full-color, 3-strip Technicolor for Flowers and Trees. He famously negotiated an exclusive contract so literally no other studio could use the technology for years. He was single-handedly transforming animation from a silent novelty into a gripping emotional medium. Which brings us to part three, the golden age and growing pains. Here's the crucial thing about Walt. He was never satisfied with just making short films. He wanted to build entire immersive worlds, no matter what it cost him financially. $1.5 million. In the mid-1930s, that was an absolutely astronomical sum. And that was the final cost of his first feature-length animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It went 3 times over budget. The entire Hollywood industry was whispering about it, calling it Disney's folly, totally certain it would bankrupt his company. To pull it off, Walt was bringing live animals into the studio and making his animators take extra art classes just to capture realistic movement perfectly. But you know what? The gamble paid off massively, at least initially. Snow White became the most successful sound film made up to that date, and during this era, they were just innovating like crazy. They pioneered the multiplane camera for a short called The Old Mill, which let animators shoot through multiple layers of glass for this breathtaking 3D depth. All of this funded a golden age of technical marvels like Pinocchio and Fantasia in 1940. However, despite being technical masterpieces, World War II broke out, totally crushing European box office revenues and causing massive financial losses for the studio. And those high stakes finally caught up with him. Because of those box office failures, Disney had to issue a public stock offering and implement heavy salary cuts. This, combined with what was honestly a highly demanding and insensitive management style, sparked a bitter 5-week animator strike in 1941. That strike permanently fractured his relationship with his staff. By 1944, the studio was drowning in a staggering $4 million of debt to Bank of America. Walt was just exhausted by the limitations and the labor struggles of the film industry. So let's look at part 4, Building the Magic Kingdom. Exhausted by the movies, Disney set his sights on a physical space. He wanted a place where parents and kids could actually have fun together in a clean, unspoiled environment. Knowing his studio shareholders would completely panic at the idea of an amusement park, Walt bypassed them entirely. He cashed in his own personal life insurance to form a new, separate company called WED Enterprises. He handpicked his best designers and animators to secretly design Disneyland, coining a totally new term for them, Imagineers. They weren't just building rides, they were engineering imagination. They studied every pitfall of traditional amusement parks to create themed, immersive lands separated from the outside world by a high earthen berm. But to fund this massive dream, Walt had to embrace a brand new medium that the other movie moguls were terrified of, television. And this is really where we see the birth of the modern brand empire we know today. He struck a deal with ABC to fund Disneyland in exchange for producing TV shows. The result was explosive. Shows like Walt Disney's Disneyland and the Mickey Mouse Club became literal American institutions. The Davy Crockett miniseries ignited a nationwide merchandising craze, selling 10 million records of its theme song alone. When Disneyland finally opened in Anaheim in 1955, the TV broadcast drew 70 million viewers. He even expanded this physical empire later on at the 1964 New York World's Fair, pioneering those incredible audio animatronic robots. Finally, Part 5, A Complex and Enduring Legacy. As Disney's influence grew exponentially, so did the intense scrutiny surrounding his politics, his workplace culture, and his worldview. When we examine his legacy, the source material lays out two very distinct narratives, and we need to look at them completely neutrally. On one side, critics have leveled serious accusations. Some cultural historians view his work as a purveyor of American imperialism that overrides local cultures. He's been criticized for racially insensitive material in older films. Politically, he became staunchly conservative, famously testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee during the Red Scare to brand former union organizers as communist agitators. And there have been allegations of associating with anti-Semitic groups. On the flip side, biographers and former employees fiercely defend him, championing him as a patriot and a beloved folk artist. In response to prejudice allegations, sources note he donated to Jewish charities and was actually named Man of the Year by the Jewish organization B'nai B'rith in 1955. Prominent Jewish employees like Joe Grant and Floyd Norman, the studio's first black animator, firmly went on the record to deny ever observing prejudiced behavior from Walt, with colleagues noting he once explicitly fired an attorney for making an anti-Semitic remark. But setting those polarized views aside, his artistic impact on the world is just undeniable. 59, that is the all-time individual record for Academy Award nominations held by Walt Disney. Out of those 59 nominations, he took home 22 competitive wins, alongside multiple honorary Oscars. Literally no single individual has ever shaped the visual and narrative landscape of the 20th century quite like he did. And here's the most amazing part. His final, ultimate gamble wasn't even a movie, and it wasn't a theme park ride. It was Epcot. That stood for the experimental prototype community of tomorrow. Walt literally wanted to build a fully functional utopian city in Florida to showcase American free enterprise and solve urban planning problems. He was obsessively working on the blueprints for this real, lived-in city of the future, right up until he sadly passed away from lung cancer in December 1966 at the age of 65. After his death, his brother Roy changed Epcot into the theme park we know today, deciding a functional city was just too unmanageable. But it leaves us with this final fascinating question. If Disney had lived to actually build his city of tomorrow, how different would our world look today? It's a captivating what-if about a restless, incredibly driven farm boy whose imagination didn't just entertain us, but permanently rewired global culture. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep asking those big questions.